We interrupt your regularly scheduled program for the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. We welcome Trace Dean to the podcast this week to talk his comic book, We Ride Titans, over at Vault Comic Books. But before we get started there, we started talking about all kinds of other things, including movies and other stuff too. So check that out here on this episode. But, as always, can you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter? And give us 5 stars on Apple and Spotify and all your other major podcasting platforms. Visit us at capesandtights.com for a wide variety of different stuff. But this is the episode with Trace Dean here with We Ride Titans at Vault Comics. Enjoy, everybody. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I finally got my office up to temperature. My office doesn't. I live in Maine. I live in Bangor, Maine. So
it's like, okay, you're in Stephen King country.
Yes, and I'm up to 70. This says 73, but it's not 73. I started at 57 this morning. So
not ideal.
No, but like I don't know what it was. Every once in a while, I feel like if I have a space heater in my office because it's not insulated very well, and if I turn it a certain way, I don't know. It's weird. But whenever I temperature, I mean, I might have to go short sleeve or tank top with you by the end of the episode. I might just like.
Are we on video?
Yes, but you're fine.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say like I finished up a run right before this. I hate to bring like jock tendencies to a comic podcast, but I was like, better get my miles in before I talk about picture books.
Yes. Well, it's funny is a good friend or a friend of the podcast, David Harper, who runs Off Panel Podcast and Sketch.com. He is a big basketball fan. So every once in a while, he talks about basketball on the podcast and people just crap on him. Like, this is a comic book podcast. Stop talking basketball. And I said, hey, man, come back on my podcast and we'll just talk basketball an entire episode. And people can shoot on me. That's fine. I don't have a problem. Let's just talk basketball. So, hey, every once in a while we have athletes on here.
I don't know if you know, like I cover basketball when I'm not doing comics. So like get me on the basketball episode and we can. I
think my plan was, and I still got to figure it out, but I want to do an episode where we cast in a way. I don't know how to really lay it out, but like take like superhero characters and make them, if they were to play basketball. So like, for an example, I was just throwing one out there, like Stiltman would be Kevin Durant because he's tall and lanky and skinny, like that kind of thing where you like do the whole like draft the roster or like, I don't know, make a movie like Space Jam for an example, like, but using real life.
Yeah. You can cast like parallels, but you can also just do like the all like superhero starting 5.
Yes.
It's fun. One of the assignments I did, when I read about basketball, I like to make sure that there's something going on besides like just talking about the sport. And the big story I worked on last year was I profiled Zion Williamson, but I did so because he had a Naruto collab coming out. Yeah. And part of the story was I went to his panel at Comic-Con. And somebody asked, they're like, what's your like all Naruto starting 5? And the speed with which he had the answer, he was like, I've thought about this a lot. So like, yeah, we'll do the all, the fun one would be like we'll do like the all-star game, but it's like Marvel versus DC.
See, there you go. See, some sort of way to, and then it will probably just evolve into talking about like basketball memories and like just shooting the shit about basketball. But yeah. We'll start it comic book adjacent, and then you get into the nitty gritties of basketball.
I'd so much rather talk about like a bunch of different stuff than just be like, here's why you should buy my comic book. Which people should.
You should.
But there's lots of other stuff we can talk about.
So you are man of many hats, right? I mean, like, so you're a comic book writer. You obviously write articles and things like that for what, GQ and a couple other things. Where are you at right now? What are you doing currently in your world?
I mean, that's a big question. It's always fun, and also I feel like almost tedious talking about like the nature of what I do at this point, because I have sort of spackled together like a weird career as a writer, where I'm currently located in Los Angeles, and when I say I'm a writer, the shortcut I tend to use is I'm just like, I don't do TV or film, but other than that, I do comics. I cover a lot. Sometimes I call it journalism, sometimes I call it culture writing. I never quite know what label to put on it, but I write for a lot of publications like GQ, Vulture, stuff like that. That's most of my day to day, especially these days, and also just over the last 5 years or so. That's like shorter term deadlines, projects that get turned around faster. And then also the other long term thing I do is I write nonfiction about like film, and I'm working on my second project for that right now, which there's few things I hate hearing on podcasts or in interviews more than like, I can't talk about that yet, but
Yeah.
soon. I can't talk about it yet. I will eventually be able to, and I'm excited. I think anybody who like follows me on Letterboxd is probably starting to catch on to what it's about.
I gotta follow you on Letterbox. I just
People
started
should follow me
doing
on
Letterbox
Letterboxd,
this year.
the only good social media platform,
Oh,
like
it's
the
so
only
good.
one. It's the best. But it's like everything social media should be. It's like, here's what I watched today, and your friends go like, "Oh, I really like that one too." And like
Or you like that movie?
every once in a while, you like that movie. I've gotten in one friend from college's mentions because he there was some movie he gave like a very middling review to, and I was like, the grounds on which you have said you are giving this a middling review implies that you don't actually understand its place in this genre. And then every once in a while, I do think like the one kind of like how Twitter kind of peaked with Drill's Betsy Ross Museum tweet. Um, I will say Letterbox peaked with the Joker review that was just, this happened to my buddy Eric once. Or this happened to my buddy Eric, which is just like the perfect Letterbox review.
It's
Um, but yeah, follow me on Letterbox.
yes,
um,
it's a fun place, and it's funny because like I didn't realize like how much just seeing other friends and people, acquaintances, and whatever on there, what their interpretation of movies are like. Oh wow, this person really liked this movie, and yet you rarely talk about it unless someone posts a social media post about it. Like you don't
yeah,
like. There's definitely one of my Facebook friends who like posts way too much about how much they like and dislike movies and TV and things like that. But then
yeah,
like I don't even know how like my brothers who are on social media like things, and it's like, but if I there's a platform specifically for those things, that way I don't have to feel like they're being intrusive and like always posting about, because I watch a lot of movies,
yeah. Same.
and it's like I don't want people to like always be like, oh, I like this movie or I didn't like this movie, and then get a conversation. But a platform for that is perfect, to the point where my wife and I told her, because I watch so many movies and usually I'm the one that picks a lot of them. My wife was like, come on, let's get some movies that I want to watch. And I said, I don't want to watch romantic comedies all day. I just cannot do it. However, I said, February, the month of love, I will do that for you. So one of her favorite romantic movies is Love, Rosie, British movie with Lily Collins in it. It was really good.
I
So
haven't
I
seen
gave
it.
her credit.
I'll have to
It's
put it
I
on.
think it's pretty good. For what it is, for the scale of like when I was telling her when we were watching all these movies, because first of all, romantic comedies are basically the same thing over and over and over again. But there's something about this movie, and Lily Collins is an amazing actress. I watched her recently in what Windfall she was in. She was excellent in that. I just actually put on my playlist to watch what was that movie? She just Inheritance. It came out a couple
Yes.
years ago. I got to watch that. So there, the Tolkien biopic
Oh yeah,
thing.
yeah, the Nicholas Holt one. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are, like I said, but the cool thing is I've learned this from other people on Letterbox, and then it's spiraled into everything else. And it's really cool. Letterbox is an awesome thing. I agree. Follow on Letterbox as well.
Totally.
So right.
Totally.
So you're a writer.
Yes, I'm a writer, broadly.
That's you're a writer.
Broadly,
Other
that's the
than
answer.
TV and movies, you said, right? Is that what you said?
Well, yeah, yeah. I don't do TV or film, and I don't know. Maybe eventually, but right now I don't feel too compelled.
And my mouse just died. And I thought a couple cool things I saw on here were the Rock Johnson
Yeah.
co-authored that book, but also to me being about a scene kid, punk kid from the '90s and 2000s, seeing an all-time low presents young renegades. I didn't know you were part of that.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that that's one of the books I'm like, or just things overall that I'm more proud of.
Hmm.
I'm happy to talk about either of those projects, but the all-time low book is one that, because of the nature of what it is, which is a book tied to a band, and also the fact that it is through a publisher that largely does direct to consumer
Hmm.
distribution. You can sometimes find Z2 books in bookstores, but their success has been in just selling directly to fans of bands. Not a ton of people have read it, and it really is like one of my favorite things I've done. It's funny. I was gonna chime in, and now I get to tie it back in. I'm a big romantic comedy guy.
Okay.
I'm a big drama. Like one of my three favorite. This isn't a rom com, but like one of my three favorite movies is Before Sunrise.
Okay.
And when they first reached out to me to do the book, I had very low expectations. Not of the band. I was a fan of the
Yes.
band, but I was just like, I don't really know what they want from this. I would be happy to do it. I need money, so I'll do whatever. And the first thing they said when I got the first like sort of pitch doc sent over was they were like, we'd love to do it kind of in the vein of like, like classic high school movies and stuff. And I was like, that's what I've always wanted to do in comics and never thought I would get the chance to do. So I just got to like just jam on like a cool sort of like star-crossed lovers type like high school reunion, I should say, romance story that also incorporated like the last 15 years at this point of all-time low music.
Mm-hmm.
It was a blast. I'm really happy with that book. And I got to work with I mean, Meg Huang was really, really cool to work with, but Rob Wilson is the other artist on the book. That's like one of my best friends in comics. We'd never gotten to work together.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, it was a blast.
Well, speaking of, I mean, we jumped ahead a little bit. How do you like? So, how do you go from, I don't want to tell your life story, but like birth to, were you a comic book fan as a kid, or are you just?
Yeah, man, I'm happy to do the life story.
Yeah.
Like, I'll do it not beat for beat, but I mean like pretty much everybody listening to this podcast, I like
Yes.
grew up obsessed with comics and superheroes, and I would say there was definitely I am not one of the people who like picked up a copy of a Claremont X-Men book when I was 7. I more so I liked superheroes and would sort of like read what I could get my hands on when I was a kid. Middle school, I was like sort of mostly sustained on manga. I was big on like Shonen Jump and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember very vividly the thing that got me going back into comic stores outside of Free Comic Book Day was it was Captain America dying in Civil War. I was like 14 or 15, and I was just like, that's a thing I should go check out, right? I should go see if they have that issue. And of course, it made no sense because it's like Captain America 25 or something, and it's like entirely referential to an event comic I hadn't read.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started sort of cherry picking like just issues or number one stuff that looked interesting. I caught on to the fact that Wednesday was when books came out, which is no longer entirely the case, which is very strange to me. But and I think what really cemented it was the following summer of 2008, which was Morrison's Batman run, RIP, Final Crisis, all going on at once. I was always a little bit more of a DC kid than a Marvel kid, and it was just like, oh, and like outside of everything else going on at the time, I was just like, oh, this is like, I've never read comics like these.
Mm-hmm.
And to date, like, I mean, the Morrison Batman stuff and Final Crisis are my favorite superhero comics ever made. But as far as how I got involved with doing it professionally, I'd never really considered it. I knew from about the time I was 14 or so that I was going to be a writer. I didn't know what it would look like. I didn't even necessarily know like what medium I wanted to work in. It was just like the one thing. There was no like aha moment. I was just like, well, I'm good at this. It's the only thing that I'm fully confident in my ability to do. And I can always get better, obviously, but I was like, there's just something here. And I was in college as my freshman year, and the summer after, I tried sort of like finding my way to a film major. I thought I wanted to like direct and write movies. And on a whim, I had ended up at my first like big comic convention. My dad's college reunion was in the same town. It was in North Carolina. It was Heroes Con. And I was the 19-year-old kid at a panel who asked one of his favorite writers, like, so how did you break into comics? Like, how does it work? And it's annoying, but I had no idea. I was like, I know Gail Simone did it this way, and Matt Fraction used to direct short films, but like, what's the path? Like, how do you do it? And he gave me an answer. It was Chris Robertson, who was writing Superman at the time and has written a ton of really cool stuff since then. And after the panel, he was like, hey, man, a bunch of my friends and I are going to be in the hotel bar after the show. If you'd like to come hang out and ask more questions, I'm happy to talk more. And I was 19 and I grew up a straight edge kid and still am a straight edge kid. So my question was, am I allowed in the hotel bar? Not understanding that it
Yeah.
was the lobby. um,
Yes.
and he was like, "You'll be fine." So yeah, I showed up and he talked to me for a few hours, and I talked about how I was kind of frustrated with how restrictive the format of screenwriting was, and how it kind of just felt like it would never happen. And he was like, "It sounds like maybe you should try writing comics." And he kind of recommended some books to me, and he was like, "I'm going to be in at Baltimore Comic Con at the end of the summer. You should come, see me there." And I did. I read all that stuff over the summer. I went to Baltimore Comic Con, and he introduced me to like half the comic book industry. It was cool. It was like I would not be here if that hadn't happened. He told me a few years ago that he tells anybody who asks him at a convention, how did you start writing comics, to come to the hotel bar. And he was like, "You're the only person who ever did it." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird. I thought more people want to go hang out with people at the hotel bar. That sounds like fun." And yeah, there's a bunch of steps in between, but that is like the origin point that's important to mention, I would say.
I feel like even if you didn't care at that moment, wouldn't you just like that'd be pretty badass to be able to go hang out at the bar with some creators?
Yeah, and I was also like, I mean, I wasn't there with friends. I was like,
Yeah.
what else am I gonna do? Like,
Yeah.
I don't, it's not like, yeah, nothing. But yeah, that's the
That's
origin point. There was a in between a bunch of like self-published stuff, and like I founded a comic publication, like an anthology, with a bunch of my friends in college. I did an internship at Marvel, and yeah, it all sort of cumulatively, excuse me, got me here.
That's amazing. And so, I mean, obviously, there's creative writing in there, and then there's journalistic writing in there, and I guess there's a crossover between the two. But is there one that you enjoy doing more than the other?
Um, I that's a tough question to answer, and I'm curious to know if you want like the real answer to that.
Well,
Because I'm happy to.
yeah, because I feel like I have a creative design background. So I'm a graphic designer by trade, and so when I go, like, I really enjoy telling facts about things, writing, but I haven't found myself the ability to actually write. Like every once in a while, I would do something more creative writing, and it's like, oh, this is really fun, but I can't get myself to always want to do that. I'd rather almost tell the facts in a creative way. And so I don't know. It's just interesting to hear someone else's opinion on someone who does both sides of it. What their passion. What would, if they had to drop one of them? Which one would you drop? Like the journalistic side of it or the creative side of it?
Well, I mean, it's funny you put it that way, and I would, again, I talk about this a lot pretty publicly, so I'm happy
Mm-hmm.
to talk about it on the podcast. And again, I'd rather have like a real honest conversation about
Yep.
this side of the creative process than just be like, yeah, so I thought I wanted to write a story about robots. Which, again, we can get to it, but like, I've been doing this full time for 5 years, a little
Okay.
bit more than 5 years at this point, actually. And um, when you do it full time and it is your source of income, your sole source of income, really, the issues that plague various industries surrounding the mediums that I work in do affect your relationship with the work itself. So
Yeah.
what you asked was like, if you had to drop one, what would you do? And I'm not dropping it forever, but We Read Titans is like the only creator-owned comic I'm doing for the foreseeable future.
Mm.
I think anybody who pays even slightly close attention can tell that the comic book industry is in a very a state of disrepair, let's say. And I will always, pardon me, I will always find ways to work in the medium. I am certainly, pardon me again, I'm so sorry. I'm going to sip some water and then finish
Yeah.
this.
Okay.
um, it's in a really tough spot, and I think at once there are more sort of startup publishers looking for new creators to work with than ever, and fewer than ever reliable ones who can sustain a book success in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it really difficult. I have some peers who are about my age and sort of in this weird little like in between generation where we were too young to sort of be a part of the generation that came up with the most recent sort of like slate of creators, and also a little too old to be with like the younger crowd. And we sort of spent the last decade priming ourselves for a very specific kind of success and a very specific kind of career. And the structures that allowed for a career like that to happen no longer really exist. Um, which is all simply to say that if I had to drop one right now, it's comics and it's creative work, fiction work, I should say.
Yes, yes.
And it's because I would much rather revisit that when it is not in the interest of like my income or trying to strive towards a specific kind of success that no longer really seems to exist. I there are certain things that I shouldn't talk about on the podcast, so I won't. But like, yeah, and as far as like what's rewarding about the other one, it is ultimately, you know, both ends of it are creative, and I love the nonfiction and journalism side of things because ultimately, like, I'm good at telling stories in a fictional capacity, but what I really I love that it. Excuse me again. I'm sorry. It's one of those things that has just never felt like work because I get to watch movies or watch basketball or talk about sneakers or menswear or fashion or whatever. And I like it's funny. Ryan Cady, a comic writer who lives nearby, is like one of my best friends. He came over a couple weeks ago to co-work with me at my place, and I was like, I'm going to put on a few episodes of Columbo in the background. And he was like, are you really into Columbo? And I was like, I mean, I am, but it is also like I'm writing about Columbo, so I need to watch it. And I was like, as I was saying that, I was like, there are worse problems to have. There are worse ways to spend a workday. Like,
yes.
Yeah, it's just cool. I love striving towards the moment where you articulate how a piece of art moves you or what it means, and that is as rewarding as you know, establishing, you know, character arcs or whatever. I would say very long answer to that question. Sorry.
And I'm glad you clarified the creative side of it. I mean, you know, basically nonfiction versus fiction, because obviously what you would do is creative when you're writing anything, unless you're writing an obituary. I mean, you know, obituaries are creative in a sense. You have to write it in a way that someone's going to want to finish reading it. But yeah, so I just this week on our website, capesandtights.com, we're going to post something about how I think that Cars, the franchise from Pixar, is their best franchise. And
that's a wild take. I really respect it, but that's a wild take.
Controversial take. Well, first of all, it's the number one merchandising, I believe, Pixar thing behind Toy Story. Like, it's one of the number one merchandised Pixar movies, but it's also not one of the most successful Pixar movies. It's also only the second one to get 3 movies.
Yeah, the reason they did the sequel to begin, like the first one to begin with, was toy sales, right? It was just like you like as much money as this made in theaters, it made billions of dollars.
Yeah. And but also it's perceived as a kids movie compared to, weirdly enough, that Toy Story and all the other ones are not. Like, it's weird, like, because of the whole toy sales part of it. People perceive it as a kids movie. And my family, and it would be more dove into the article, but like, my family me, my wife, and my son got COVID in August, and my son's was a little over a year old at the time, and all he wanted to do was watch Cars. Like, and we don't let him watch TV all the time, but it's like, dude, this kid's feels like he's dying, and like, he can do whatever he wants at this point. And so all he wanted to watch was Cars 1, then Cars 2, then Cars 3. And one of the benefits of that was it wasn't a movie that doesn't have a sequel or any spin-offs, so he didn't have to watch the same movie over and over and over again. But I've seen now, you know, 20, 30 times each of the movies. And each time my wife and I would get to the point where he'd go to bed or take a nap, and we'd still watch it because there was so much we were getting out of it continuously. We're like, why are we still watching this stupid movie? We've seen it a ton of times. We're getting innuendos, we're getting all these things that I've seen Toy Story a number of times that I just didn't get out of it. And so that was, and it's like I said, it's a personal opinion on it, obviously, but like, in my opinion, it's the best franchise they've had, and there's a bunch of reasons to it: casting, jokes. You know, obviously Pixar just kills it on animation. But yeah, there was just something. So I was writing this, and I was like, I'd rather write this, which is still creative, but it's based on like you put in there who directed it and how much money it made. All that's facts. But I get to be creative within the same sense that me going, oh, I'm going to write a movie like Cars. I just don't think that to me would be the way I would want to go, because I like the idea of taking something that's factual and being creative with it. And that's where I was getting to the point where I was like, because you had touched both, and I get the benefit of my side of it. And actually you too, is I would have never heard of We Ride Titans, in my opinion, unless I was covering the comic book industry. Not saying that it wasn't promoted enough or so on and so forth. I just wasn't into, up until about 2 years ago, I wasn't into anything but Marvel and DC, and mostly
Okay.
Marvel. So like independent comic books just weren't even on the radar to me. Like it wasn't even like I wouldn't want to touch them. I read The Walking Dead, and in a sense it's independent, but because of the TV show, it became more of a mainstream thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And so like to me, it was like, because I was in the market media and getting these, I mean, I got an advanced copy from, or not advanced copy, but a copy of the trade digitally from Vault to read. And when you guys were promoting the sale of the trade, and I was like, oh my gosh, I really am kind of pissed that I missed the initial run of buying single issues, because I'm a single issue person. And I am picking up all the single issues. I don't even have the trade. I have all the single issues.
Okay, sick.
But yeah, so like, it's, to me, it's like, because like I get the lucky part of it that I get to write about these things, so I get to write about something I enjoy. And you mentioning footwear and film and sports or whatever, it's passions of yours that you actually get to write, articles and the journalistic side of it.
Yeah. I want to just back up for a second
Yeah.
and say, first of all, that Cars take is so wild. And I don't even say that disrespect. Like, I was
No.
talking to a friend of mine on the phone last night, and she was talking about, she works in film, and she was talking about how much she hates horror movies. And she was like, they're cheap, and like they're all so cliche, and like they're not, it's also like it's not real, it doesn't feel real. And I was just like, boy, I sure do disagree with almost everything you're saying, but you're saying it with such conviction that I want you to keep going. And yeah, like I'll be the first to read that. And I am like a dyed in the wool one. I say it kind of facetiously, but like I kind of love having an excuse to be like contrarian or a hater. The moment when like everyone is obsessed with some movie and they're like, oh my God, I swear it's the best movie I've seen in 5 years. And you finally watch it and not even be like, I don't think it was bad, actually, is like compelling to take. What I love is where I'm like, I thought it was all right.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun.
Like it could have been made, it could have not been made. It was good, but
Yeah, I didn't feel any particular way about it. But yeah, I love reading people's contrarian takes, and also like as much as I love the moment after, like, again, Ryan is like one of the people I go to the movies with the
yeah.
most here in LA, and like I love when we walk out of a theater and like are completely in line on a movie. Which we saw Magic Mike's Last Dance this past Friday, and we were both like, that's pretty good. Not much to say about it, pretty good. But I remember we didn't see it together, but we had like wildly different opinions about the movie Babylon. And I was just like, okay, now we're cooking though. Now we get to talk. Now we get to hash it out. I loved it. He hated it. Or what he
Okay,
was.
so that's interesting, because I watched it last night for the first time.
Oh,
First
are
of
you
all,
gonna Babylon?
first of all, I am, even as a movie film like lover, I can't. 3 hour movies are just the
I
end of
get
me
it.
right
I
now.
get it.
To me, like, I much rather watch a mediocre 3 hour and a half movie now than an excellent 3 hour movie at some points, because just of time constraints. But it was, at the end of it, I was like, what the hell did I just watch? And I couldn't tell whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. Like,
Yeah.
it was well made, and Margot Robbie's amazing, Brad Pitt amazing, and I don't even know who the other guy is. The guy,
Newcomer. His name's Diego
yeah,
Calva. Yeah.
okay, the whole, it was great. I just thought to myself, it wasn't like the best movie I've ever seen, but it was like, I don't know, in that movie of like, if I had 3 hours again in a couple of years, I'd watch it again. But like, I don't know, I just was like, I love when a movie makes you go, what the hell did I just watch? In a way that you can't tell whether or not it's a bad thing or a good thing.
I appreciate a couple of things. One, because I'll for the sake of the listeners, I'll tie this into comics too. I would almost always rather read or watch or whatever something that like is almost confrontational in the way it's like, I refuse to let you be neutral on this. Like, you have to have an opinion. You are not
Mhm.
going to forget that you saw this. Like, you are going to, even if the takeaway is like, I thought that was dog shit. I thought they
Yes.
like their reach exceeded their grasp. Like,
Yeah.
um, I always respect a swing. I do also, in your defense, also have to imagine that like one broadly 3 hour movies hit a little different at home than in the theater. And also, you said you have a kid, right?
Yeah. I have a 2-year-old or almost 2-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough situation to watch a 3 hour movie and having a 2 year old, I would imagine.
Well, we tend to go to bed like 9 o'clock at night. It's like our goal of my wife and I.
You.
And so my son goes to bed at 7 right now. So it's like one of those things where it's like a lot of times it's a if you be around 2 hours, then that's the movie. We'll literally sort like by time to see how
Yeah,
long these
I
movies
get
are.
it.
Because and so like, but like a 3 hour movie, but also you have if you sell me on a 3 hour movie with people like Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt, you get me on that. So I already gonna watch this movie. But it was just like one of those things where I'm like, okay, I just have to do it. And again, like I said, at the end, I was like, what did I felt like similar the same way about everything everywhere all at once. And I loved that movie. It was just
Mhm.
like, what did I just watch?
Those are
Like
two very ambitious movies,
like
which I love. I would encourage any list. I don't usually be like, oh, I don't usually welcome strangers in my mentions telling me I'm wrong. But like, if you were listening to this and you hated Babylon,
yeah.
tweet me. Let's talk. Let's talk it out. Let's talk it out. Let's have some fun. Um, but yeah, and like I said, as it broadly applies to comics in the interest of sort of like directing it back around, I'm sure people don't mind us talking about movies, but like
Yeah,
I
no,
know
no,
it's
yeah.
a comic podcast. I I can always tell both as a reader and someone who's now like made a bunch of comic books. You can tell when a creator's just really left it all on the page,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's an artist or a writer, and that's the work that sticks with me, even if I didn't necessarily like it or if it didn't
Mm-hmm.
resonate with me. And yeah, yeah, that I don't think, We Ride Titans is necessarily like crazy experimental, but I definitely wrote it that before everything I talked about earlier regarding the state of the industry. I definitely wrote it with the assumption of like, if this is the only one you ever make, let's make sure it's like worth it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the ethic
Well,
I
I
move
don't
on
want to
to.
spoil anything about Babylon either because people should watch it. It's not that long ago that was released, so like it's one of those things if it
Right,
released two or
right.
3 years ago, but like it doesn't even slowly get ready. That's the thing either. Like it's like there's definitely comic books over the past couple of years that I've read to do a review on, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, just get going with this freaking book. Like seriously, I get into the nitty gritty. This movie is just like at the very beginning, you're just
Oh,
like,
it
this is what
starts.
the movie's gonna be like. Here we go, and you're just like,
The,
holy shit.
the letterbox review I read about it, that like anybody who's seen Babylon will know, and hopefully this will entice anybody who hasn't to at least check it out, is it said like, is this Damien Chazelle's Jackass? Which like
Yes.
kind of um
Yes.
and it's there were like there's a without spoiling, there's like a lot of stuff with animals, like more than once. And
Yes.
it really does have like Johnny Knoxville energy at times.
I could foresee someone turning on Babylon for the first time and watching it and going, wait, did I just fast forward to the end of a movie? Because the way it's so massive at the very beginning of this movie, it feels like it would be the culmination of a movie, which is pretty cool in that sense too. And I didn't realize that he was it Damien. You said Damien Chazelle. He's like, I mean, Rotten tomato meter is like 79%, 94%, 90%,
Yeah.
91%, 87%, 86, and then they only gave him this one 56%
This was
recently.
well, it's a divisive movie.
Yeah.
It's walking out of the theater, and like I've seen it. I saw it twice in theaters, and both times I sort of like listened to the like buzz around, and it was
Yeah.
truly like groups of friends who like, even within those little circles, one person would be like, I really liked it, and another person would be like, that was the worst movie I saw this year. Which yeah, like I said, if I can write something that like two best friends have such wildly differing opinions on at
Yeah.
some point, like career well spent, man. Career well spent.
I liked 10 Cloverfield Lane personally, and First Man wasn't bad, and I like this movie better. And those got way better ratings for both audience and critics. So
Yeah. His
I
runs are amazing.
yeah,
Um,
he's pretty good. I mean, I would tell you, I makes me want to go back and watch some of this stuff. And La La Land obviously killed it too, but that was his most successful movie. But success isn't always driven by money and stuff like that too. Like if he was, here's the deal. If I learned this as being a Kevin Smith fan for a number of years, just make what the hell you want to make. And if you like it, you like it. And if you can make a living and people still give you money to make movies, just keep doing it. Like, who gives a shit?
Yeah, it's funny because on one hand, you look at, and again, I can tie this into
Yeah.
comics, but like look at the career of Damien Chazelle,
Mhm.
and it's four films that very much feel sort of in conversation with one another. They are dealing with very similar themes. I think that Babylon is very much like his response to what happened at the Oscars with La La Land.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, the other filmmaker I've been thinking about today is Steven Soderbergh, who is like one of, if I have heroes, he's one of them. And just thinking about the last few years of his career since he came back from retirement, he's made like
Mhm.
8 movies. They're all very different. He works really fast. He seems very unconcerned with making work that feels of a piece. He's very much like, I'm just going to try this, and then we're going to try this, and then we're going to try this. And
Mhm.
I don't have time to stop and stress over anything too much. I don't want to worry about the release model. If HBO Max will just put it out and give me the money to do it, then I'll do it. Um, and again, as much as I love the idea of having almost more of a body of work like Grant Morrison, where everything is quite literally at times like in conversation with the rest of his work, and
Mhm.
there's that there's that theory. I really am like obsessed with this, and I'm gonna butcher it because it's been a few years, but that like he has over the last like 25 years or so been telling the same Superman story, but like non-chronological. And if you read it in a certain order, then it's one seamless narrative. That's so sick. I
Yes.
do also love I love like Chris Sabella's career, where he really will, like, he's not picky about the publisher he works with. He's just like, I have a lot of ideas. I would like to try as many things as possible. I have a lot of
Mhm.
artists I want to work with, and I will do them. I will seize every opportunity I get to tell a different story, which again, like I love. And also Sabella like has written like a couple books that are among my favorite comics of the last 10
Mhm.
years. Yeah, I've told him, I was like, you feel like the Soderbergh of comics, and he was like, yeah, that's like one of my heroes. So that means a lot. I was like, I can tell, like, yeah.
And it's funny, speaking of Soderbergh, I think the opposite reaction to what Damien Chazelle was getting with Babylon with Kimmy in a couple of years ago, or like last year. I feel like the fans were divisive on it, but the critics weren't on that movie. I really liked that movie, but the
I like
fans
that
were
movie
out
a
there were
lot.
like for 50, like 50 on that. And I think it was a great movie. And I think it was one of those, I don't know. I'm going to be controversial here, as people may have listened to this podcast knows. I wasn't a big fan of the Batman, and so
So
I
you
do
were or you were
like.
not?
I was not,
Okay.
and
Well,
seeing her, what's her name?
Zoe Kravitz.
Yes, in this movie, redeem myself for her as an actress, and that's just, I don't want to get all into the fact that I didn't like the
Oh, you're
Batman
fine,
movie,
man.
but
Well,
like,
I would say first of all, we don't have to do the Batman litigation because that will be another hour. But like no, if you haven't seen it, like the thing that I'll point to, and also I'm trying to I truly, like, I will just talk about movies in the interest of like not boring listeners. I will again try to tie it into comics and
that's
stuff here.
fine.
One of the biggest just broad creative inspirations on me over the last like 10 years or so is she was in that one season long High Fidelity show on Hulu, which, have you seen?
I've not seen that. No, now I'm gonna have
I've,
to.
I've watched it like 4 times, and
Okay.
it was one of those weird early pandemic victims where it premiered right before the pandemic. It had a second season guaranteed, and then like because of the pandemic and Zoe Kravitz's schedule and stuff, it just got canceled.
Oh
And
yeah.
so it was on a cliffhanger, and like, but it's perfect, and she's incredible in it. But I think that's a really great show in terms of character writing. And yeah, I thought Kimmy was really fun. When you work at the rate he does, and also at the skill level,
Yeah.
the floor is pretty high. Like
Hmm.
I've never, especially since he came back from retirement, he's made like 8 movies. I haven't regretted watching any of them. There are ones I like more than others.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, man. Like when a bad when your when your floor is like, I don't know, Let Them All Talk, the like Meryl Streep movie, like
Hmm.
you're doing pretty good.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there, yeah. In the interest of, say, I try not to when I was talking about quality of movies. A lot of times it's like looking at ratings, because when someone tells me a movie sucks, I'm usually like, okay, now I'm gonna want to have to see this movie because you have such a strong opinion about it. I really want to see this. But there's also the opposite effect on if someone likes it a lot, then I had to see it to see the same opposite reaction of it. But there's one of those things that there's just names like you mentioned Grant Morrison and other things. There's just names that also like no matter what their movies people say about the movie, I'm going to see it. And because this person makes good movies, I'm going to watch this movie. It's just the way it is. And Steven Soderbergh does stuff like that too as well. And now I feel like after watching Babylon and then seeing, I didn't even realize some of this stuff that this person had made, Damien Chazelle.
Yes.
I might watch other things that this person creates in the future because of certain movies. And the fact, like I said, there's certain movies. I mean, I just watched for the first time, even to the comic book person, the Punisher movies from the early 2000s. I had never seen them. I don't even know why I hadn't seen them. It was just I watched them and I was like, okay, that just took up time. Like they just didn't do anything for me. At least Babylon did something for me. Whether you like it or you don't, it's definitely going to do something to you. And that's worth taking your time, especially the precious time we have nowadays, and how busy we all are. Speaking of Zoe Kravitz, I actually rode a roller coaster with Lenny Kravitz when I was in high school in Ohio. He got to skip the entire line. We were waiting in line for like 700 hours, and there goes Lenny Kravitz. But he was at the very beginning of the roller coaster, and I was at the end. So I should be like, I should write a story about like, oh, it's been a roller coaster of life with Lenny Kravitz.
There you go. It's a pitch. Yeah, man. I
don't watch this High Fidelity though.
It's really good, and again, I would say that like much like with comics, even if like a Punisher movie is a little bit of a waste of time, which I would argue the 2004 one, it's 2003 or 2004 with Travolta, right? That one might be a waste of time, but I also think that even if you were just using it to sort of understand the entirety of, I would say a genre, but really at this point, kind of a micro industry like superhero movies, there's always value in it. And also like, it's the same reason, like I won't say every year, but every 5 to 6 years, I will watch as much of the Ben Affleck Daredevil as I can get through, if only because I'm just like, it's insane that this happened. Like there will never be another movie like this. And it's not good. It's not, I wouldn't even argue there's like artistic merit, but like it is just, it feels like an object of another time already.
So this last week's we had an episode last week on Wednesday on this podcast. Well, this comes out, whatever. Episode 80 on the podcast was our discussion of the 1994 unreleased Fantastic Four movie.
Oh, the Corman joint.
Yes, and so we had a bootleg copy like everybody else in the world has that we watched and watched that. And then my take on the end of that movie was, it's not the worst Fantastic Four movie that's
it's not.
And someone's like, oh my gosh, really? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, honestly, if you were to take what they did in that movie and expand it out with a massive budget behind like a Marvel backing like there is nowadays, and the movie would have been really good. The problem was that they didn't have everything to do the big things they wanted to do with it. Just like I said, the plot, the actual screen accurate, book accurate version of Doctor Doom, and all that stuff was great. And there was obviously some wicked bad things about it, but to the 2015 Fantastic Four might be worse than this movie, which is saying something because. I mean,
it's that's a rough one, and I don't know, man. That movie is such a fascinating like cultural object, especially bringing it up now. I mean, I don't even know if some listeners would know that this happened, but like over the weekend, Warren Beatty did his like live Dick Tracy special on TCM. Did you hear about that?
No.
So it stems from the same sort of like motivation as the Corman movie, because if I'm not mistaken, and I'm a little fuzzy on this, but like. The reason they made the Corman movie was to just maintain copyright. It was like, we have to make this or we lose the rights. And similarly, like Warren Beatty directed the Dick Tracy movie. Yeah. He's retained the rights to the character in film over the years. And there's a clause where like you have to do new Dick Tracy content every X amount of years. And he has twice now maintained the copyright by doing a live interview in character on Turner Classic Movies with Leonard Maltin. It is so strange, like truly, utterly bizarre. And rules. It's the weirdest shit. And I saw people on Twitter this weekend being like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. And I was like, I'm sorry, what would you like to see someone doing with the Dick
Yes.
Tracy copyright material? Do you want them to like establish the like DTCU, the Dick
Yeah,
Tracy
like
Cinematic Universe? No, I want to see Warren Beatty in
it,
full costume doing an interview in character and referring to, he's like, well, I believe the last time you spoke with Warren Beatty, it's the coolest shit. It's
that's
so cool.
that's
Um,
amazing. That's what's the weird things about these copyright things like that. And they made the Fantastic Four movie, but the weird thing is, still to this day, no one really understands why. Is the only thing you need to do is be in production.
yeah,
They
they
didn't
didn't have to
actually need to
put it in
finish the
early.
movie. Like, and I was trying to talk to my buddy Paul, who was the co-host with me or the guest with me that day, and he owns my local comic book shop. And I said, you know, if this wasn't the Fantastic Four, if it was at the time, obviously pre 2008, if it was Iron Man or even the Incredible Hulk with the Incredible Hulk TV show, if that, do you think they would have released it? But because it was the Fantastic Four and such a valuable franchise in the Marvel, bullpen, that they were not. They're like, okay, we need to protect this, and we want what was going to happen a couple of years, or ends up being like freaking 10 years later, where they made the 2004 version of it. But like, if it was a B character of some sort, not an A or A roster character, maybe the movie actually would have been made. Because I mean, David Hasselhoff played freaking Nick Fury
Yeah,
in
he
a movie.
did.
Like the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie was made. There's the Captain America TV movies where Captain America was a freaking lawyer were
That one
made,
was
but yeah,
rough.
this
I
movie
have to.
wasn't allowed to come out. Like it's just a weird ways that how this works and how this happens in backroom deals and all that stuff. But there's a book coming out. There's a documentary on it called Doomed, and then there's a book coming out, which has the audiobook company is Alex Hyde White, who played Mr. Fantastic on the
Ooh,
movie. He has an audiobook company now called Punch Audio, who reads audiobooks. And
okay,
so Mr. Fantastic is going to read the biography or the story of this movie as an audiobook,
I
which
love
is
that.
like, that's amazing. So
Books
he has,
about books about unmade movies are like catnip to me. I have a couple in my reading stack in the other room. Yeah, it's the best.
yes.
And yeah, man, and it's fun. I again to tie into your comics for a second. I saw the Captain America TV movie thanks to like this very weirdly specific, like formative moments in my like young comics adulthood, I would say, which is we would do these like trips to New York City with my theater. I'm from Richmond, Virginia,
Mm.
and once a year we would drive up and see some like musicals and stuff. And there was always some free time, and it was always like it was the first time in my life I like as a teenager was allowed to like roam New York City unsupervised. And I remember my junior year, I'd finally heard about like Midtown Comics, like the Times Square
Yeah.
location. So me and a different Ryan who lives in Chicago, um, my friend Ryan and I went to Midtown, and this was when you see these guys at comic conventions all the time now, but I'd never seen the bootleg DVD section, which they
Mm-hmm.
don't have anymore because
Nope.
Midtown is like so much more like legit.
Legitimized.
But like they had like racks of just like bootleg like tokusatsu shows and like Super Sentai. I always get self conscious
Yeah.
saying that out loud. I never know which one, but yeah, and they had the Captain America movie, and I was
Yeah.
just like, I didn't even know this existed.
This,
I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole yet, so I bought it, and I was like, what's this even like? And what it was like was bad and basically unwatchable, even at age 16. But yeah, man, very very specific time in he's going to the shelf. What do we got? There we go. You got it. You got. Oh, mine had a way jankier cover. How'd you get that one?
I don't know how I got it. I've had it forever.
Mine had like a 480p resolution.
Yeah, I bet this one does too, honestly. It's 203 minutes. Jesus.
It's that
Or
long.
yeah.
I don't
Oh
remember
no,
it
wait,
that.
hold on. This is because it's got both. It's got Captain America and then Captain America 2, Death Too Soon.
I didn't know there was a second one. Okay.
Yeah, he has a Captain America bike.
Jesus.
So a funny story is Alex Hyde White, who was Mr. Fantastic, actually his first comic book movie was in the second Captain America movie.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of
That's a little
funny. It's
career.
Christopher Lee. Yep. Reb Brown, Len Berman. Captain
The
America.
dad from Christmas Story is the villain in the first
Yep,
one, or
yeah. But it's just
yeah,
funny. It's like he's wearing a motorcycle helmet all the time. It's just this like it's the history. I mean, of these Marvel movies. It's just funny thinking about the Fantastic Four movie wasn't released, but all these other movies were, and it's like they are on the same wavelength.
it's
They're
not
all
worse.
equal. There's
Yeah,
there's no way that movie is worse than this movie, and yet they were like, yeah, no problem. So it had to be something to do with they didn't want the Fantastic Four to go down in history with this one, which it ended up getting paired with this
yeah.
movie at some point. But yeah, it's just a weird time, and it was a fun discussion and a fun looking back on those things. And now I think we want to do a whole series of things where like I want to watch like the 2005 Man Thing movie, and I want to watch like the like I said, the Nick Fury with movie, and then the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie.
Dude,
This one.
you hit me up. I'll come on for one of those. That'd be
Yeah, that'd
fun.
be fun. I actually haven't seen the Man Thing movie. I own that one too. I don't know where it is. But that one was a direct to DVD, I believe. Man Thing, but it says Marvel. Like at least this one, I don't even know if this one actually says Marvel on it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't say anywhere Marvel on it, but it's NBC Universal actually made the movie. But like, the Man Thing movie says Marvel right across the word Man Thing on the title of the movie. So
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Can I ask you a question?
if you want,
Allowed. Is that allowed? Okay. Because we're on a comic book podcast.
Yes.
I'm just always curious. Like, what have you been reading lately, man?
What have I been reading lately? What
What have you
I'm
been
told to read. No, I'm
what are
kidding.
yes, so
Well, honestly, I read a lot more nowadays, and this is my whole comment about the whole We Ride Titans part, where I maybe wouldn't have even stumbled upon it in the timing that I was at with only reading the big two mainly. And honestly, I'm not even a DC fan, so I was reading Marvel. And my controversial opinion too, the best Marvel hasn't we haven't had the best Marvel in 15 years because it was Secret Invasion and Civil War in that era of Marvel's my favorite Marvel. I'll read that over and over and over again. But currently, I mean, I've been talking because of a couple guests I've had on. I've fallen in love with some series that have been like Specs from David Booher, who also wrote Canto. That was really good. Where I'm reading, I have a book club at my local comic book shop. So every month we read a new graphic novel or trade paperback, and we just read Something's Killing the Children again. That was a lot of fun. I like that one.
Unreal, dude.
Unreal. And so yeah, I don't. It depends on what's going on right now at the time. I find myself reading a lot of newer stuff just because I want to write something about it and stuff like that. So, it's hard to see what else I'm reading in that sense. My buddy Joseph Schmalke has this book coming out, 7 Years in Darkness, and because I'm a Patreon subscriber, I've actually got to read issue 3, and he's only has issue 1 coming out in March, at CEX Publishing.
Cool.
But yeah, most of the stuff I read is basically because I have to read it. Not have to, but because it's coming out and I want to read it before it comes out or at the time it comes out. But 8 Billion Genies has been really good.
Genies is very good. Yeah.
Very good. I actually had my list in front of me from. Yeah, there's a lot of good things. There's a lot of good things looking forward to as well. Like, there's definitely series. I mean, the week we record this, Foulness in the Wall from Colin Bunn comes out, which I'm excited for that one. That one's good. Colin's a great horror writer. I'm into horror comic books right now, and actually, horror comic books. It's a funny transition. Horror comic books is what got me into horror movies. I wasn't a huge horror movie fan.
Oh, really?
Until like it just never really like anybody I've ever dated growing up, like any girlfriends I had or friends I had just weren't into it. My family wasn't into it, and so I just never got into it. And then all of a sudden, I started reading horror comic books. And I was like, oh, these are really cool. I want more horror in my life. And I watched a few movies. Like this past October, I put a list together of like the classic horror movies that I need to see. And I watched a bunch of them. And I was like, okay, I can do this. So now when a new horror movie comes out, I'm like, gotta see it.
What's the best horror comic you've read? I'm curious because
I personally think Nailbiter.
Nailbiter is very good.
I like Nailbiter a lot.
Good. In terms of like a high concept, it's just sort of like, what if there was a town where all the serial killers came from? Is just like so good. Real like I wish I'd thought of that kind of stuff.
Yes. And then honestly, there's a new series out at Dark Horse called Where Monsters Lie.
Yeah,
Kyle Starks. That is is a similar vein in the sense that they're not all from there, but it's a community of where serial killers and crazy, thriller people live on their off time, which is kind of like there's a seriousness to it because obviously people die, but there's also a comedy to it because of that. But that one also is, like I said, I would put in the horror genre. That's been really good as well.
Kyle is the guy to date who, like, if his name is on a book, I will buy it sight unseen. I will not. I don't even need to know what it's about. I think he is quietly. I think because of the nature of the work he does, which is often so heavy on comedy, he maybe doesn't get enough credit for like truly being like one of the best comic creators of the last decade.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the best.
Kyle will be on. This is a breaking news. Kyle Starks will be on episode number 100 of the Capes and Tights podcast to talk comic books.
I will be tuning in for that because he is also probably the best podcast guest in comics.
He's excellent on that stuff too. But like, I'm a big zombie. Like I said, the only horror book that I read for the longest time is I've been reading The Walking Dead for a long time, obviously. And then I started reading Year Zero over at AWA. And then they did a prequel with Daniel Kraus called Year Zero Volume Zero, about the zombie apocalypse and things like that. What's the Furthest Place from Here was really good. So yeah, there's a bunch of good stuff out there. I find myself reading newer stuff because of
man. What's the Furthest Place from Here is pretty hard to argue with. Like Matt and Tyler together is like dream team shit stuff. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss. Sorry.
You can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, those are, I don't know. You have good taste, and it's interesting. Like horror being your venue to getting into horror film, or horror comics getting you into horror film. It's such a backwards path, and it's interesting because I think for a long time it was actually it's difficult to pull off horror in comics, weirdly enough. Yes. I think a lot of people gravitate towards it, but because they are fans of the genre at large. But the nature of the medium makes it difficult to, pardon me, pull off horror using traditional beats.
Yes.
The page is in front of you. And I think that Nailbiter is as good as anything at replicating the beats of horror film. One of my probably 5 favorite comics ever is Lock and Key, which I will say has won like all-time Main Zone, indeed. Yeah. Has won all-time comics jump scare, but broadly feels so much more about maybe not like Lovecraftian dread, but like atmosphere and like really just making you invested in characters to the point that when something bad starts to happen to them, you're like, oh no. But and the one that, it's funny because this is like, I don't know if James would call Department of Truth a horror book, but
I think he would.
It scares me as much as anything. Like that book is frightening.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with the art, but also just the ideas at play are very real.
Because my question would be then, if Department of Truth is James Tynion the fourth, is that his only technically right now? I mean, I guess Wind is not horror.
Yeah, Wind's not quite a horror book.
Wind's horror, not horror. And I guess, he has that new one, Blue Book, coming out on Dark Horse, which is about UFOs, so it's not really horror.
But I think James would be the first to admit that there's probably elements of horror in just about anything he does.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I was going to say about Nailbiter was, that's obviously Joshua Williamson, but Nailbiter had this feeling of making me feel uneasy, not specifically jump scares or grotesque in a sense that some horror things can do. I mean, I just, this year, obviously, the end of the year, watched Terrifier 2, which is a grotesque movie, but it's like, and it can make you feel uneasy, like some people did. But like, there's something about comic books. It's like, how can you really get scared by a comic book? Like, how can you really get like to the point where you can't just shut the book and stop reading? A movie is a little harder to turn off, especially if you're in the theaters. You can't be like, I don't want to watch this anymore, and like cover your face up. It's happening. Where a book, you could just be like, and throw it. Nailbiter had this like, not like direct correlation nightmares. It gave me these uneasy nightmare feelings when I would read it before bed, and it was just like, this is insane. How can a book make me feel this way? And it's some of the things with Department of Truth with Martin Simon's art in it is, Martin Simon's art is very uneasy feeling and uneasy looking that gives you that horror aspect. So I would put Department of Truth into horror. horror category?
I think it probably is. And the thing with, Nailbiter, that I think is an effective utilization of, classic horror technique in comics. It's been a few years since I've read it, so I don't remember a lot of like hard details. What I do
Yeah.
broadly remember is the idea that like the main character shows up to that town to investigate what is, when compared to the grand scheme of what the book gets into, like something kind of on the smaller side. It's the
Mhm.
one there to investigate the one guy.
Yep.
Um, and the realization as you tear through those volumes, I remember it being a book that reads very fast too, and that's not a slight. Like it's easy to sit down and like binge read a compendium of it. Um, you just slowly start to realize it's a very like almost film noir thing that like they are in way too deep.
Yes.
Like something so much bigger is at play, and it's too late. Like once you realize it's like a frog in boiling water. Like they don't realize till it's too late. Which I found really effective. I will admit I did not finish Nailbiter. I had like two or three trades left, so maybe this is. And I know it recently came back, so this is the push I
Yes.
need to like, yeah, pick it up and get back to it.
It was one of those things that my buddy at the comic book shop, then it's only those two things that I've missed the boat on in a sense, where he was like, you really need to read this. And I was like, I'll get to it. And I missed the boat on, and one was Something's Killing the Children, which I now have all issues, but I should have bought it because I paid way more for issue number one than I would have. Actually, it's right here, 9.6.
Oh yeah, there
But
we go.
but it was that one and Nailbiter, and I was able to get Nailbiter, and I now am collecting single issues of it because of the fact that I like it so much, and I've read it a number of times now, and it's really good. But that those are like the two that were like, he need to read this, and I was like, I'll get to it, and I missed the boat on, and in a sense, like I feel like I missed the boat in that sense, and only coming into like reading independent comics over the past couple of years, I feel like I missed the boat on a lot of things. So not only am I trying to read what's coming out currently, but I'm also trying to catch up on some of these independent comic books that I never read in the first place, and that's a lot to read because like you mentioned about the state of the comic book world we live in, is there's just a lot of publishers and a lot of things coming out that's just like
More than
thrown at
ever.
you, and it's just getting crazy to that point where I have to like, you know, I get emails and get inundated with emails with like, read this, read that. And I'm like, I made a rule for myself in the foreseeable future is I'm only going to review for number ones.
Okay.
And just for right now, I just need to review number ones. That's all I'm going to do is review number ones, unless it's a trade. Like I might wait, and then if it's a 5-issue series, then maybe I'll review number one, then review the whole series at the end when a trade's getting close to help promote the trade if I like the book or not. But
Yeah, I think that's a very. It's funny. Among other things, I reviewed comics for IGN for a year,
mhm.
almost 10 years ago at this point, like 2014 or so. And one thing that I found increasingly kind of frustrating was being assigned like random issues of like a current Captain America run, or how do you reviewing an issue one is different. That is
Yes,
like reviewing a TV pilot, but um, it's very difficult to assign a sort of letter grade to like the
yes,
middle chapter of a book. And I would like for the industry, it's, similarly, or to tie it into We Ride Titans, like I remember um, just like issue 3 or 4 was the first one that I just didn't see anybody review. And because as a creator you want people to talk about your book, it was a little frustrating, or I was a little confused, but I was also like, what could somebody say about the fourth issue? Like it it's the fourth chapter of a 5 chapter book. How do you
yeah,
assign, how do you like this one was a B or whatever? And especially when it's hitting shelves at the same time as a bunch of like new number ones
yeah.
or one
This
shots.
this issue is really good, but I really would like to find out how it culminates.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, like even around, I want to say I saw a review of issue 2 that was like I think this is I should stress as I talk about this, like
Yeah.
none of this is conversation with people who review comics. Like this
Correct. Yes.
is um but I saw somebody in issue 2, or it might have even been issue 1, talking their review about how they were really hoping, they were like, this doesn't quite gel for me yet, but maybe as the series goes on and the world is built out a little bit more, I'll have a better understanding of this. And in my head, I was like, oh, I have some bad news for you. Like that does not happen. Like that's not what the book is about. And I don't say that. I on one hand, people read comics for different things. I've never been a
Yes.
world building guy, but also, my intention with We Ride Titans was we've been talking for over an hour. I'm just now talking about my book. Cool. I'm doing great. But I didn't really have the intention of like building out a really a lived in world in which you understood like,
Mhm.
the origin of kaiju and origin of mechs or whatever. I wanted to talk about like why I don't really talk to my sister anymore and what it was like when my parents divorced. And this was the vessel I used for those feelings. I think that it would be much easier for someone reviewing the book to take it in its totality and not have to wait a month, if not more, between issues to be like, so are they going to explain where the kaiju came from? And like, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read it, like, nope, they're just there, and that's fine. That's fine. I don't personally feel, both as a reader and a creator, that the book works any better if you understand like, well, one day there was an asteroid and
Well, yeah.
like,
There was
yeah,
193 issues of The Walking Dead, and they never explain. You never know how it started.
exactly. That was an example we used when we were first developing it,
Yeah,
because editor Adrian and I were very much on the same page. We were like, we don't really need to explain how this happened. The fact that they are there, that there are giant
yeah,
monsters, justifies why the robots exist, because
correct.
you have something about those. And nobody, it felt like a waste of panels if there were just like, again, like two panels where Kit says to her dad, like, ever since that chasm in the ocean
Yeah.
opened up and these monsters showed up or whatever, like, that doesn't do anything to the story. Everything you need to understand about the way the world functions is evident in details that are provided on page, like the fact that there's one Titan per city and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And it's usually operated by a family, but sometimes it's operated by, like, they've outsourced to local government. Um, I saw one person. I won't slight them for this. If anything, I was like, that's a funny take, but they had questions in their review about the infrastructure of like how they were like, I'm sorry, would the brother not be in jail for piloting it drunk? And I was like, you're thinking about a very different book, but I like where your head's at.
Yes, and then it ends. That's it. Done.
Yeah, I was like, book's over, book's over. Um, and or they're like, he should be in jail, and I was like, if this were the real world, yes, this is a
Yes.
pretend comic book, but yeah,
You know what? There's no such thing as actual kaiju either. So it's
yes,
or
yes.
massive robots that fight them. It's just, you know, just doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
it's funny. I will not say who said this because it is a deeply, deeply, deeply canceled person. But I remember I watched a video from a screenwriter who on YouTube years ago where he was like, I was talking to my dad, and my dad asked me, "How do you kill a vampire?" And I said, "Stake to the heart, silver." Cross, sometimes garlic will repel them. And he was like, no, 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 you can kill a vampire however you want because they're not real. And I was like, oh, that's right. Like, you can.
Was it what we do in the Shadows movie where they like, oh, I stabbed him in the head with a spike, it means he's dead, it means he was a vampire or whatever, and he's like, well, I think pretty sure if you stabbed anybody through the head with a spike they would die. Just because you stabbed them in the head,
It's
like
just
it's
so
just,
good.
we got to stab them in the head. No crap, you got to stab them.
Yeah.
If you stab someone in the head, they die. Whether they're
Yeah.
honestly, we've learned whether they're a zombie, vampire, or whatever, like they're gonna die. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, that was pretty
Stab
funny.
someone in the head.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's it.
Curtains.
They were sure for sure a vampire at that point.
Yes.
But I like how the comparison. I don't want to like set people up to be like We Ride Titans is the most iconic thing since The Walking Dead, but it's in the same vein. I like to explain to people when you talk about something, when you look at We Ride Titans, for an example, and you do the kaiju hit hard, family hit, is the very first three words in your solicitation for issue one, or for the graphic novel, I should say, or trade paperback. It's not about kaiju though. That's the thing that The Walking Dead, it's like, if you're like, oh, zombies, or walkers. It's not about the zombies. It's about the people, and there's a story that goes along with it to facilitate the story of the people. Because this story, in my opinion, and no offense to you, would be very boring if it wasn't having to do with kaiju's and robots and
Totally.
massive robots. You need to have some sort of vessel to tell the story, and I think it's a unique way of telling it because I don't read that many kaiju stories, even though I've been told many times to read like Kaiju Max and things like that. But that's what I love about it. It's like telling someone, "Oh, read this." Oh, I'm not really a big kaiju fan, but read this because if you want to read the drama the redemption, the family story is in there, not just 20-story monsters.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. And um, yeah, I wouldn't say that the sort of kaiju and mecha market in comics is like super oversaturated, but it was funny around the time I was starting to pitch it. I was talking to my buddy Alex Packnadel, and this is in I believe like 2020 or so, if not maybe like late 2019. We were talking about me pitching the book to Vault, and he was like, I want to give you a heads up that I think I just like it, I was doing a mech book that fell through at another publisher, and I think Vault is going to pick it up. And I'm gonna feel awful if like it interlaps with yours, or like affects it negatively. And I was like, well, what's your book about? And he started to talk about it. This book is Giga. If nobody's read it, it's very good. And he was, in short, he was like, religion. And he was like, what if these were like the carcasses of gods? And I was like, Alex, we were writing very different books. Don't worry about it. And sure enough, it was not an issue at all.
No.
Yeah, and I feel that way with genre as a whole. Like maybe you don't want to be putting out 3 or 4 werewolf books at the same publisher at the same time, but like it's ultimately what you do with it. And when I first started sketching out Titans, I knew that I mean the initial draw after I sort of like was starting to figure out how to work these into a 5-issue series. I was thinking a lot about legacy in like superhero books. And I was initially I've never felt compelled to do like an invincible thing where I like create my own superhero universe. That's not really something I'm interested in doing. But I was initially like, I don't know, are they superheroes? And I was like, I want them to be people who are have lots of responsibility and have to save stuff. And I knew there needed to be like action or something. And I know I love like I'm a child of like Power Rangers and stuff. And so I was like, oh, let's make it mecha like that, because also that would be fun. And like as much as I am like exercising personal demons, it'll let me like every few pages be like, and then something fun and cool happens that, and selfishly also like you don't want to pitch a book to an artist and be like, oh, it's like a bunch of scenes where characters are sad and having serious conversations. You want to be able to be like, and also you'll get to like design robots and monsters, and you will pretty much have free reign with that. And sure enough, like Sebastian was like the best fit for this book. I'm obsessed with his work in it, and all of the things that I wasn't interested in, like how the Titans worked, he was like, I've got you covered. So yeah,
I slept on Sebastian. I mentioned this to Mark London from Mad Cave Studios, because Sebastian Perez just did Exorcist Never Die for them, which comes out in April. And I went on a rabbit hole on his Instagram, just like in awe of the artwork that Sebastian has put out. And then I was like, why does this look familiar? Because I had first read We Ride Titans in the summer, this past summer or fall, whatever it was. I think it was solicited for the fall. It was like September or
in November.
So like September, October is when I got the PDF of it from Vault or from the marketing team, and I was like, oh, that's where I know this artwork from, and like, oh my god. And I just, to myself, I'm like, he has immediately jumped into one of my favorite artists, and then obviously complimented by Deacon of colors. Did Jim Campbell does Jim work for Vault?
Jim works all over. He works fast. Like, he's very good.
Okay, I was just saying, like, I didn't know. I just said he must. I basically anything I've ever read from Vault, I feel like Jim Campbell's name's on it.
Yeah, he's one of their go-tos, and rightfully. Yeah, man, it was a kick-ass team. I'm really, really happy with how everything turned out. They made my job super easy.
And that's one of those things I've always like. If this goes down to what you're known for in comic books, and you decide not to do any more comic books in the future ever, and this is what you got, the team you have, the story, the Vault to me has been a great publisher to work with on this side, on the the journalistic side of it. They've been an amazing partner on that sense. And so you pitched it, so they obviously picked you, not really you picking them in a sense, but like great partnership there with this book because that's definitely worth it. And single issues are sporadic. I believe, I honestly think like Midtown Comics still has them on their website. You have them on your website.
We did
Uh,
not set the comics world on fire, so you can find them at most comic shops. And if you want to get a signed one, you can hit up my store, which is like tracedean.storeenvy.com. I've
yes.
got all the variants. They are not crazy expensive. Your boys got bills, so hit me up. I'll write whatever you want on that comic book. I'll sign it as Grant Morrison. Like, you just tell me what you want.
It always reminds me of the episode of The Big Bang Theory when Sheldon wants Stan Lee to sign his Batman comic book. And he's like, Batman didn't do anything, nothing to do with Batman. He goes, yeah, but I'd be the only person with a Batman comic book signed by Stan Lee.
Cool. Be pretty
Well,
cool.
true. I guess
Yeah,
so.
I should just put other comics I own on there and be like, I'll sign these too. I'll sign Something Is Killing the Children 1 for you.
$2, you'll
Yeah.
sign any comic book.
For a
Send
slight
me a comic
upcharge.
book with return shipping on it. I will sign anything.
For a slight upcharge. And as far as it being the only, I always I want to be careful about how I phrase that, because it's not like I don't intend to like never ever ever make a comic again. And in
Yes.
fact, I'm doing a little bit of work for hire stuff right now. I also I don't know why I'm stammering over these words. Oh my God. Years ago, this is back in 2016, I did a little self-published one-shot that was sort of an like homage to action movies with my best friend and an artist named Kenny Drews, who is also my friend, called Kill the Drug War. It's like very Adult Swim-esque, I would say. But we made a sequel to it called Kill the Drug War Again. And I wrote the script like 2 years ago. And it's very like, hey, Kenny, just like whenever you have time, you can knock a page out. He's pretty much done. So we're going to get it lettered, and that will hopefully be out later this year. But yeah, mostly what I'll do now is I'll pursue some work for hire stuff as it presents itself. And hopefully, in the next year or two, I know generally what I would like to work on next. I just want to be in a place where I can afford to deal with these sort of industries infrastructure surrounding. Like I said, it's not a great time to have to force out a passion project because you have to pay rent.
Correct.
So I will worry about making sure my bills are paid, and then I will hopefully dip my toe back into it eventually.
And it's just it's an interesting. We could go obviously on for hours about the industry in a sense that like my local comic book shop has been a go-to place for me for years, and even that I go like, hey man, what about this book? And he's like, well, I didn't get that book. I've never even heard of that book. And it's like, it's not good when your comic book store owner who does all the orders doesn't know about a book. And it's mainly because it's like, he's like, I don't even know who that publisher is. And I was like, yeah, that's what it is nowadays. It's just so many publishers. There's so many people trying to get their book made, which is great. I mean, for the industry in a sense, I'm glad people are that gung ho about making comic books nowadays. And it's really cool in that sense. But in the same sense, it's like, geez, like there's just so much. He's like, his pull list or his like order list for people to pick up this week was 64 titles long.
That's insane.
64 new comic books that came out this week. That's not all of them. That's what he picked to have in his shop.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I know we're running a little long, so I'll wrap this up pretty soon. But I would say that the big picture of it in terms of like why the industry is in this state and why there are all these little startup publishers is obviously people who start small publishers now and independent publishers are doing so with the intention of generating IP and generating books that they can then option to any number of streaming services, because there's such a streaming boom right now and such a TV boom and a film boom. And that is like slowly collapsing, which is to say, and it's from up. It's from the upper end. It's not the failure of any creator. But the result is that, like, I mean, I will not draw attention to it, but if you go on a lot of more prominent than me comic creators' Twitter accounts or whatever, they're talking very openly about how burnt out they are and how difficult it's been to find work and how difficult it's been to be compensated fairly and timely for their work. Which is all simply to say that, like, with all of this stuff, I'm sure it's not good for retailers. I have to imagine it's been frustrating. I would encourage anybody who cares about comics to, one, support the books and creators that they care about as directly as possible. I would also encourage any creators to, especially like young ones breaking in, to understand that this is a real period of transition and that When things are as unstable as this, I don't want to sound, mercenary, but I would encourage people to I take the money and runs a little strong, but like
Yeah.
if you can get a book out, if you can force something out through this weird moment of transition, if you can get it published, that can't really be taken away from you. And there is value in having done that. I will say, don't let yourself be exploited. Don't let
No,
yourself,
that too. Yeah.
yeah, don't let someone run off with the IP. And just do your due diligence. Don't sign a contract just because it means that you don't have to send the book to the printer yourself. Um, but yeah, it's a strange time. I'm curious to see where the next few years go. And I'm curious to see what sort of work people manage to do in the margins of it. And weirdly excited to, I guess. But at the same time, like a big part of my motivation with We Ride Titans wasn't just, um, and Vault's in a much better place than a lot of the publishers who are sort
Yes.
of subtweeting right now. This is not a slight to Vault or anything, but I was like, if we get that trade out, if we even just get the issues out, because I know people who have finished comics, not at Vault,
Yeah.
but like finished comics and they just like never got a trade.
Yeah.
If you finish it, I'm like, cool, they can't take that away. It's done.
Hmm.
It's in print. It's there until they sell out or stop printing it or whatever. But like that's the end goal to me. And I think it's healthy to think about it that way. The idea of just like get it done while you can, and once it's out, nobody can take the work away from you.
Exactly. And the idea that the benefit of it getting a trade out nowadays is like they're not likely ever going to put the single issues back into print. But the
Exactly.
trade could eventually be like, oh, look at that. Depending on the timing, and people want stories like this or whatever. If they end up selling out of the trades, they can send it to print and get a new copy made. Someone's more likely to buy the trade 5-6 years from now than they are the single issues. So it's like your first goal was getting it out, but then like it's nice to have that bonus to have the trade be
Yeah.
made as well. And that's, I mean, it probably has something to do with the fact that it's 5 issues, because, if it was 10, 12, 13 issues, it would have made 3 trades
Yeah.
or
Exactly.
some sort of compendium thing. So like it's a nice thing. And I that's the other conversation that someone can have for a long period of time is the mini series versus the ongoing and all this other stuff that's going out right now. There's just so many mini series that I used to be able to say, I'll always take a shot on a mini series because you can get me 3 to 5 issues. I can pick up 3 to 5 issues. But when there's 30 miniseries, that means I have to pick up 150 issues. A little different.
A little
So
different. Yeah.
very
Weird time,
different.
man.
Yeah, but it's very weird time. And like I said, it's insane that like I am now the onus is now on me as the purchaser of these comic books, the customer of this comic books, to then go to my local comic book shop, and he's now bringing in all these issues, and I almost feel bad not buying as much as I should be buying to support him as a local comic book shop.
It's
But there's
tough.
just so many issues. Like it's just a tough little balance to have. And now I tell you what, I have bought less Marvel over the years and more independent. Not out of like screw Marvel. It's more of just
Yeah.
transitioning and what my passions are and things like that. So but yeah,
Oh, I
I'll
appreciate that.
always say, and I've always said to people on the podcast, is you're a small business in a sense too. Like obviously buy anything. If you want to support Trace, like if you want to support him and say, I want to buy your book and I'm really excited to rewrite Titans, buy it wherever you can find it. But if you want
Yeah.
to support the extra level, the books on your website is where you get the most,
Yes.
pull for it
So
financially. But
I will receive money directly if you buy it from me. It looks good for the book if you buy it from a local comic shop, local bookstore. I'd prefer people. I would. But I don't know. Vault can't fire me for saying this.
yes,
I'd rather you just pirate it than get it from Amazon. But like
yeah,
whatever. Yeah, that's the chain of command, I would say.
it's one of
Um,
those things that like we've talked about this with a number of people, and they're always just like, the more you buy it, if you buy it from your LCS because they have it on the shelf, they own that book and they can't send it back. So it's helpful to buy from them because they're not stuck with that inventory.
no,
You know,
totally.
if you buy it from you or a small business, always talked about that around the holidays, like buy from, because it's one of those things. We talk about 8 billion genies. 8 billion genies, number one, obviously, when it got optioned, it skyrocketed and people wanted to buy all the copies, whatever. And I went on eBay and it was like someone was selling one for $50 for number one, and plus shipping, non CGC, just regular book. And then I just Googled 8 billion genies number one, and Ryan Brown's website came up. The
Yeah.
artist from the series for $20 signed by both him and Charles, shipped. You could get it from them. And I was like, why are people just not Googling this stuff? They're going online spending $50 from some bimbo on eBay when they can get it double signed from the creators and give them money to their pockets on their website by just Googling one thing. So always check the creators' websites, because the creators usually have their own copies. And sometimes they have specific copies you can't get anywhere else because they're like your copies or whatever, or someone else will be sold out of those copies and you have them.
That's right behind me, man. Like, take them off my hands. I would encourage.
Plus, it's out of your inventory. You have less things to worry about at your house.
Yes, yeah. I have a 1-bedroom, so help me clean it out.
But that's excellent. So I'm glad. So Rewrite Titans is available from Vault, like we just mentioned.
Yes, sir.
You can find you're throw me off every time I see your handle on Twitter because it's your title massage gun.
My display name is Massage Gun Kelly. I've been thinking about switching that up soon, but yeah, just Trace, TRES, and then writes stuff, like writes with a pen. And yeah, that's where you can catch my opinions on, I don't know, basketball and movies and stuff. I'm really annoying on Twitter, but you should still follow me. And I'm the same on pretty much any social platform.
Letterbox. Find him on Letterbox.
Letterbox. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, dude, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you having me on.